Welcome. My name is Elizabeth Argyle, and I will be your host this evening. Tonight's webinar is on wildlife photography as part of our new virtual series, Second Nature. I'm here representing the Living Coast Discovery Center, a nonprofit zoo and aquarium located in San Diego, California. Now, this program is being sponsored by our wonderful partners, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We have four brilliant panelists here joining us this evening: Ralph Pace, Jennifer Leigh Warner, Jonathan Lavan, and Craig Chaddock. And they're going to be sharing their expertise on photographing nature. But before I turn it over to them, I just wanted to go over a few things. Number one, this program is being recorded so that we can share it through our social channels, including YouTube and Facebook. Secondly, if you have any questions for the panelists, we'll have time at the end of the presentation to take a few questions, and you can go ahead and post those in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Now, the chat feature has been disabled in order to help streamline this process. And if you're watching us or joining us live on Facebook, we are monitoring those questions and chats, and we'll try to answer some of those questions as well. But we have a full lineup, so we're going to start with the panelists and we'll do the questions at the end. And so without further ado, let's turn it over to our first guest speaker, Ralph Pace. Now, Ralph is an underwater and environmental photographer who has spent many years in San Diego, but currently he resides in Northern California. Ralph's work has been used by many NGOs for educational, advocacy, and identification purposes. He's worked on humpback whale research in Hawaii, protected vulnerable sea turtles in Mexico, and captured newsworthy pieces on the disappearing kelp forests of California. So Ralph, thanks for being here tonight.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's good to be with you here. So let me just screen share. Keynote, share, and okay, we good? Is that working?
Yeah, it looks good.
Right on. So thank you for that. And my name is Ralph Pace. I live in Monterey, California, but I lived down in San Diego for almost a decade. And I am an underwater photojournalist, so I spend a lot of time trying to go out on the water or under the water looking for unique or interesting stories to help share it to people so they can garner some interest in the ocean, and hopefully we can make it a better place. But a lot of my work is spent working with scientists, documenting their work and what they discover. And I also work a lot with fisheries. So this is the bluefin fishery, and I've done a lot of work in Southern California and Mexico. And then also just trying to document the changing seas. So this is from 2015 when all the sea lions were getting really sick with the El Nino and the food disappeared. And here's a sea lion eating still a living mola here, eating its gut, which is normally not on their, it wouldn't be normal fare for them. But, you know, there's a lot of worry that as we lose fish species, our ocean's going to turn into a big old sea of goopy, gelatinous jellies. And then more recently, I found some sea lions playing with an N95 mask, and with COVID being around, we're seeing a lot more of this mask pollution in the ocean. But I preferred more of the natural history stuff. So this is a 16-foot great white feeding on a humpback here in Monterey. And I really am partial to whales. I really love whales. It's a blue whale here in Monterey. But I didn't start like a lot of photographers with the idea of becoming a photographer. I was actually doing graduate work at Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, where I was working on a project down in Mexico to stop a big marina project from being built. And along with ruining a lot of intrinsic value and really pristine nesting habitat for sea turtles and birds. And there was a lagoon with crocodiles in it. It also would have ruined world famous surfing waves. So we were able to put an economic value to the wave and then stop the construction. And it was kind of at that time that I saw that photography was a really good tool to help communicate some of our science issues. And after graduate school, I moved down to Costa Rica to a place called Tortuguero. And I continued to play with a camera. We were down there tagging and monitoring green sea turtles on the most important beach, green sea turtle nesting beach in the Western Hemisphere. And again, there was just so much wildlife there that I continued to use a camera. And at that point, after my year contract was up, I decided that I would like to pursue photography. So I moved back to San Diego and stuck to the things that I knew, and started documenting sea turtle work. I wasn't full-time photography. I was still working in sciences, kind of doing both and just trying to pay the bills any way I could while I was still learning some of the ropes, and continued to document the scientists in San Diego that's have been able to help these green sea turtles return to Southern California. I still work on sea turtles. This is up off Half Moon Bay up in just around San Francisco. And while we don't have as many of them or as clean waters, these turtles get way, way bigger. This is about a 9-footer that I found recently. But this is one of the first pictures I ever took underwater. It's in black and white because I didn't know how to use underwater flashes yet. It was really, really awful color, but it was kind of like a starting point. And I just, in order, I think, to do anything well, you need to be really comfortable. So I was just diving a whole lot, getting as comfortable as I could, exploring. And then I would say I kind of had a break when I was out with some researchers and we had caught an opah, this 140-pound opah that's very popular in sushi markets. And they're mesopelagic, so they live below 300 feet. And there was a paper that had just come out that said that they had full body endothermy. Some sharks and tunas have endothermy, which means they can regulate their heat since they're cold-blooded. It's obviously a big advantage to them. But then from there, it got published, and that was kind of went everywhere. And we always say that's what paid for my dog's dog treats from there on. But I also was fortunate. I got to jump in with a big eye thresher. This is a 12-foot big eye thresher shark that lives down below, generally lives below 1,200 feet, comes up to the surface at night. But his tail is about half its length, so that's like a 6-foot tail. And I really like sharks, so I continued. This is in La Jolla Cove, where you can, there's a really good opportunity to go photograph sharks, super docile. And here's a Mako shark right off La Jolla that I photographed. But as I continued to photograph, in the beginning, I just wanted to get pictures in focus. I mean, I think that's like the first goal is like, okay, I got one in focus, great. But then you're kind of trying to change your style and your messaging, so it's more changed to what's happening. Okay, so maker sharks are pretty well targeted in commercial and recreational fisheries, and numbers have dropped a lot. But on top of also trying to change the messaging, I've also tried to change the technique. So here's some silky sharks in Cuba, and I always say that like 80% of your work in the beginning is just to cover all your bases, and the last 20% is where you start to get creative. And then, so these are the same set of sharks, but I was relying on, instead of 2 flashes to go off, I was using 6. And that's where you can kind of start to see these sharks within sharks. So for those that are into like looking to pursue photography or just get better at it, I just always say, like, constantly be reevaluating what you can do. Always try to push where you can go with it. And here's another example. We had these sea angels here recently. And so this is, out of the gate, you get a picture of it. And then you say, okay, I got it covered. How can I make it more visually interesting? How can I make it a little more exciting? And if you just keep sticking with it long enough, you'll get lucky. So I'm following this thing, and it happened to swim under one of these masts that washed in from the rains. And the first thing I always tell people, this is one of the first pictures I ever shot on manual. So a lot of times when people get a camera out of the box, they take it out, it's on automatic, they start taking pictures. It's better than what they took with their iPhone, and they're like, this is amazing. But I always encourage people to get off the automatic modes. I took this, I learned one day, I went to Fiesta Island with my dog. He was just running around in circles, and I just was playing with the dials, moving around, just shooting in different light. And once you kind of get a hang of that, the possibilities are endless, because a camera is just a computer, and it's just a tool, and you're ultimately a lot smarter than that. So if you want to get the most out of it, I would really recommend going to the manual. But also to shoot things. So this is just behind my house in San Diego when I was there, and shoot things that are like animals that are repetitive. So these hummingbird moths and the hummingbirds, they go to the same trees, they do the same thing over, and it's predictable. So you have a lot of chances to shoot at it. And then also pick things that aren't overly quick. You know, I mean, this guy's just going to sit here for you, or this is a slug in my backyard, or a snail, and this is a lizard in my backyard. And I always say, like, you don't have to go to some really amazing exotic location. I think that's been proven this year with the pandemic, is a lot of people are still making a lot of amazing work, but they're not traveling anywhere for it. And I would always caution on how you approach wildlife. I mean, some animals like burrowing owls, if you spook them, they are quick to leave. So this is the San Diego River. And I just waited till it went into his burrow, and I set up my camera on a camera timer or a remote, so I could just take a picture. So rather than me standing over it, scaring it, it's just a quick little click. It's kind of maybe a funny sound or a little annoying to the bird, but it won't make it relocate. The only thing I would suggest is set it up so you're not taking pictures of the little grass there in the bottom. Or if you have a kid, use those guys, right? So this is up in Tahoe. These are the chickadees coming down, bugging my daughter. And the other thing I would recommend is just pick something you love, you know, and shoot it a lot. And if you have the opportunity to shoot with somebody that's a lot better than you, I would recommend it. This is a guy named Flip Nickland. He's a world-renowned photographer and a San Diego native, did 30 years with National Geographic telling whale stories. And I go out to Maui with him every year for 3 months, and we document humpback research. But it gives you an opportunity to see something happen. You can go back, you can shoot it again and shoot it again and try to create new ways. And so you see, oh, I see one tail. Can I make it 2 tails? Next year, I'll try to find 3 tails. But we're lucky. This is an iPhone picture of the Bixby Bridge. It's a 10-second long exposure handheld. I mean, it's just remarkable the tools we have now. We have no real excuse not to shoot, and all the tools are there. And if you guys have any questions, I'll be around at the end to answer any questions, or feel free to get in touch.
All right. Thank you so much, Ralph, for that amazing kickoff. And next up, we have Jennifer. Jennifer Leigh Warner is a fine art wildlife conservation photographer and the Ethics Committee Chair for the North American Nature Photographers Association. Jennifer's award-winning work on ethics in nature photography and human-wildlife coexistence is used to promote conservation efforts locally and around the world. Jennifer, thanks for being here.
Great, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here, especially in this company. Just like you said, I'm Jennifer Leigh Warner with my company is called Experience Wildlife. I started about 16 years ago, right out of college. And I became the Ethics Committee Chair for the North American Nature Photographers Association back in 2018. And with that organization, we are creating materials to help photographers be more cautious of how they are with interacting with wildlife in the field. And I'm also working with conservation organizations to help further their mission, particularly when it comes to human-wildlife coexistence and saving species in their natural habitats. So I first got started as a very small child. I was always just obsessed with big cats particularly, but pretty much any wildlife. And at a very young age, I was introduced to National Geographic, both the magazine and specials on TV. And I just knew that this was the path that I wanted to take. I wanted to use photography as a tool to actually share the stories of animals, knowing that they couldn't speak for themselves, and help advocate for them and preserving the places they live. So I did study photography in college. I was a communications major with an emphasis on photojournalism. And out of college, I started to do anything I could to get into photography. I would enter art festivals and galleries. I was published in books and online. I started working with conservation organizations such as the Cheetah Conservation Fund, which is, you'll see me on the upper right-hand corner with some cheetahs up in Namibia when I spent a couple of weeks there photographing both the wildlife, but also the researchers and the work that they're doing. On the left-hand kind of side, you can see me in Kenya. I love Africa, but I do photograph all over the world. I'm here in a photo blind. They're photographing some wild elephants that were coming up to a watering hole that was set up in front of this blind that they placed. But I absolutely love being out in nature and advocating for wildlife. My work is always focused on trying to have a purpose. I don't just take pictures because I want to get pretty images. I want to take images that are going to inspire people to fall in love with species and help them preserve those habitats, preserve those species, and start making actual change to help save these species. This animal, this is a cheetah called, his name is Dominic. He was rescued at 3 days old from the illegal wildlife trade in Namibia. And unfortunately, when cheetahs are taken at such a small age, they don't learn the necessary skills that they need to survive. So this guy will end up living in captivity for the rest of his life and be serving as an ambassador for his species. So making sure that we are educating people and advocating for these species so that we can have these wild places for them to live. Another thing that I do is always try to aim for connections. So when I'm out photographing wildlife, I'm looking for moms and babies or mated pairs or even animals interacting with each other. I'm trying to get animals that are exhibiting some sort of behavior, particularly like these California sea lions that were in La Jolla. I'm trying to show something more than just your average portrait and really trying to show this, this interaction between species. Advocacy is another extremely important thing that I'm doing with my photography. I did say that I serve on the ethics committee, or I'm the chair of the ethics committee for North American Nature Photographers Association. And one of the things that I tie in with that work is documenting particularly photographers, but anyone who's out in nature interacting with wildlife. This is an award-winning image that I took in Grand Teton National Park. This bear is the most famous bear in the world. Her name is 399. And this is the type of behavior that she is having to deal with every single day. Crowds of people coming in to see her and interact with her. And you can see here this ranger on the side who's holding people back so that she can just cross the road. So documenting this behavior, whether it's bears in Yellowstone ecosystem or sea lions in La Jolla, I'm trying to showcase how we're interacting and then working with legislators to actually create real change in order to give wildlife enough space to survive. So I've created a couple of tips for anyone who's trying to get into nature photography, and those tips have nothing to do with camera settings. Those are all more practical things. So first off, get to know your subject. So when you understand your subject's behavior, you're gonna have a much greater success at predicting what they're going to be doing. And then you can prepare yourself for those special moments when they do happen, and they are rare and they are quick. So for example, if you're seeing a moose bedded down and it's raining really hard, you know that eventually that moose is going to stand up and probably shake that water off. So instead of being set up for a moose that's just laying there, have your settings set for something faster, knowing that you're going to want to get that action shot of the moose shaking. Or birds, right before they take off, they typically poop before they fly. So looking for that behavior and then knowing that as soon as that happens, that bird is probably going to take off. So knowing your subjects is going to help you get better pictures. My second tip is getting eye level with your subject. So whether that means crouching down or laying down on the ground, if you can get eye to eye with your subject on a more intimate level, you're going to be capturing far more intimate portraits of your subjects and really getting it from their perspective. Third, always have your subject's best interest in mind. So ethics is the most important thing to creating any photograph, and that means that you are having your subject's best interest in mind, even if that means sometimes sacrificing the picture in order to have the subject's best interest. So for example, this image here is of a fox in Grand Teton. This is the subject of an article I just wrote called "A Fed Fox is a Dead Fox: The Negative Impacts of Feeding Wildlife for Photographs." So this fox was recently put down by the National Park Services because photographers were feeding it in order to lure it closer for photographs. So we want to make sure that whether it's baiting wildlife or approaching them too closely, that we are always making sure that we are not impacting wildlife. We're not calling to them. We are just letting them behave naturally. And you're going to get much better images if you're actually capturing that natural behavior. So I also have a couple of my favorite places for you to photograph in the San Diego area. So I lived in San Diego for about 7 years, or the San Diego area for about 7 years. And I have a couple of my favorite places. So first being La Jolla Cove. I know Ralph mentioned La Jolla as well. It is a fantastic place to photograph, whether you're in the water or on land. There's lots of great animals there. It's an incredibly diverse ecosystem, and you're going to be seeing a lot of marine mammals and nesting shorebirds there as well. With the marine mammals, you're seeing harbor seals and California sea lions. They are marine protected animals, so you want to make sure you're giving them lots of space, but they are set up in a place that are really easy to photograph from a little bit of a distance. The harbor seals are giving birth right now. You can see brand new pups on the beach. They have closed down the beach for 5 months a year to allow for pupping season. So this is one of the only places on Earth that you can actually watch live harbor seal births, and it's such an exciting time. In June, you can actually see California sea lion pups as well. And you want to just make sure you're giving them lots of space. The parents do go out to sea and leave them alone, so you don't want to approach them when they're gone. You don't have to get that close to get a great picture. So La Jolla Cove is a great place to see this. The second location I would suggest is the San Elijo Lagoon Ecological Reserve. It's great for bird photography. I recently photographed burrowing owls there. I never give owl location specifics, but I will tell you it's a pretty highly trafficked area and it's pretty used to people coming by. So check out the trails, see what birds, there's lots and lots to photograph there. And then my third place is Lake Hodges. If you're familiar with grebes, they have a very unique behavior where they do what's called rushing. They basically walk on water when they are courting each other, and this is a great location to see lots and lots of that behavior. But lastly, photography is meant to be fun, so just go out, enjoy nature, see what you see, and just be respectful of wildlife, and you will have a great time. So a couple of shameless plugs. I do have a newsletter on my website, experiencewildlife.com. Lots of interesting things on that newsletter. I send out about twice a month. I also have a free online community, Experience Wildlife Workshops. Doesn't cost anything to join, and you can network with other people who are interested in photography. And I do field trips as well, Alaska, Africa, Galapagos Islands. I go all over the world, and I'd love for you to join me. And you can find all of that on my website. And this is my contact information. So experiencewildlife.com. My community is experiencewildlifeworkshops.com, or you can email me or find me on social media. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jennifer. Now I have the privilege of introducing you to Jonathan Lavan. Jonathan is the owner of Underpressure Diving and Nature Photography. In his role as a naturalist, citizen scientist, and wildlife expert, he leads diving and photography trips all over the world. His photography has shown in galleries in Los Angeles, San Diego, Chicago, and his home state of Maine. He is a staunch environmentalist and educator of young people, and even dedicates some of his precious time leading school groups on tours here at the Living Coast Discovery Center. So take it away, Jonathan.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you, Elizabeth, for that. My name is Jonathan Lavan, Underpressure Nature Photography. And first of all, I would have to say I agree with my two associates who have spoken so far. Everything they said is exactly true. What you do need to do is enjoy yourself, and you need to take as many photos as possible, as often as you can, because practice makes perfect, and that is simply a fact. And you have to have deep respect for the animals, and you need to know as much about the animals as you can, as was spoken to before. So I want to talk about diversity. I want to get you excited about this amazing planet and all the different animals that you can find on this planet. You can see from this picture right here how diverse the planet is. And here I am. So if you see me on the street, feel free to walk up and say hello, particularly if you have a pizza. So let's look at some underwater animals. Mostly fish are underwater, but there's also lots of other animals like reptiles and mammals that have adapted to being under the water. Here is the largest fish in the world. I took this down in Mexico. This is the whale shark, and it's up to 59 feet. And you can see that it filter feeds by sucking the water into its mouth like that and eating tiny little animals like krill and shrimp. So that is a fish. These are also fish, oddly enough. They don't look a lot like fish. You've got the tiny little pygmy seahorse that's less than an inch. You've got the spiny head blenny that's about an inch, both very different from each other and from all other kinds of fish, and just truly unique. Then there's animals that live under the water that really probably don't belong there ultimately, but have evolved to live under the water because that was the way that was the best for them to survive. So you've got the manatee, you've got the American saltwater crocodile. All of these animals have adapted to life underwater. And then you've got the green sea turtle. This sea turtle is on the top of a shipwreck, which is up to about 30 feet in the water in La Paz, Mexico. And what I want you to look at is there's a little tiny spotted pufferfish hiding under his flipper right there, if you can see where I'm moving the arrow. So there's always a lot of neat interaction between animals. You know, animals seem to, yes, there's predation, of course, but animals seem to be more cooperative than we are as a general rule. And then over on the right, you've got some harbor seals. I took this picture in my hometown of Harpswell, Maine, which is where I grew up and learned to fall in love with wildlife from a very young age. And of course, I got to give my shout outs to all of our local animals. We've got our state fish, the Garibaldi. That's the marine state fish. Garibaldi, the largest damselfish in the world. A lot of people think, you know, most sharks are big, scary sharks that are pelagic and eat people. Well, that's silly. There's lots and lots and lots of other sharks. So these cute little horn sharks that have these big dorsal spines that makes it very hard for them to be swallowed. And then you've got your stingrays, which again, as long as you do that shuffle when you go in the water, you're going to avoid the stingrays. There's lots of different species of stingrays. Iconic to California, the rockfish. And this is the vermilion rockfish. There's lots of different species. They're truly amazing. Up along the coast of the US, the west coast of the US is really the only place you will find them overall. Many different species and just beautiful. And of course, the giant kelp. Very few areas in the world have the conditions to grow giant kelp. And luckily here on the California coast, we're one of them. And this is how the kelp grows. It can be up to 175 feet long, but you can see here, this is the apical meristem. And that's how the bulbs and blades end up forming at the top of the algae there. All right, so invertebrates. We are vertebrates. We have an internal skeleton and a spine. Many animals that live in the ocean that have been around a lot longer than us, and also not in the ocean, like insects, as a for instance, they either are soft-bodied animals or they have an external skeleton called an exoskeleton. So you've got your East Pacific red octopus. You can see this in La Jolla Canyon all the time. And octopus, believe it or not, are mollusks, which means they're related to snails. So it's really just a fancy clam ultimately, but I'm kidding. But octopus are very, very, very smart animals. And you can read more about that. They're one of my favorite creatures because they're so unlike us. And then there are lots of nudibranchs. Nudibranchs are basically snails that no longer have a shell. And in this case, this kind of nudibranch, the opalescent nudibranch, eats animals that have stinging cells, cnidarians, and it can actually absorb the stinging cells and move them to the end of its serrata, which are up here on the top, and use it as a defense. And so it's amazing to be able to eat a stinging animal and then use the stingers in the animal. Fascinating. Then there are spiny brittle stars. These are some of my favorite animals. They're everywhere. They're under every single rock. They're probably the base of the food chain around here because there's just literally hundreds of thousands of them, but you don't see them that often because they're under rocks. This is under the oil platform off of San Pedro, where they're like literally like a living carpet on the understructure. These are on a gray moon sponge, and just they're all the same species, but just the patterns and colors is just phenomenal. And then you have our pelagic squat lobster. So every once in a while, we get these huge influx of these schools of these crustaceans. Most crustaceans are not up in the water column. And these guys do spend some time on the bottom, but often you'll see them swimming around up in the water column. And that's why there's no background, because he's up in the water column. And not an easy shot to get. It took me a while, but there's your weird little pelagic squat lobster. And then finally, for our underwater animals, here is a Narcomedusa sea jelly. I took this in Nia Bay, Washington, where the water is very, very cold. And there were just a bunch of them moving around in inner space, I like to call it. All right, let's look at some birds. Almost all of the pictures of these birds you will see here were taken in the San Diego or Southern California area. This is a spotted towhee, and this is the male. And they really kind of just sit there for you because they're trying to attract females. They'll be singing quite often. Here is a belted kingfisher. This bird, on the other hand, very elusive. It will light, which means it will land, but then it'll fly away immediately. And I've managed to get a couple good shots, and I really like this one because it's on the end of this long curved stick. This is a kind of a duck called a hooded merganser. This is the male, and he can put that hood up or take it back down, but just truly a beautiful, beautiful duck. And here is a West Indian woodpecker. So this is when I was diving in Cuba. This guy was right outside the window of where I was staying, making a loud racket. And so I, of course, had to get some pictures of him. I love that you can see his tongue there. All right, this is a local bird. This is the Reddish Egret. So these animals do this crazy weird dance, and they hold their wings up like that to shade the water to better be able to see the little fish and other prey that they're trying to hunt. So this guy just looks like he's doing some crazy kung fu dance, but he's just again, the intensity of his gaze and just the feathers, he's just another incredibly wonderful animal. This I took down at the Living Coast Discovery Center many moons ago. This is an osprey or fishhawk. I'm going to guess you know it's a fishhawk because it's carrying a fish. And you see there that even though the wings are kind of blurry, which suggests movement, the eye is really, really focused. And that's what I like about this picture, because it kind of tells a story. You don't have to have everything in sharp focus all the time. And here is a yellow crowned night heron. We've got a bunch of cool herons around here. This one has a crab in his mouth. Beautiful bird. Look at the wing plumage there. And then finally for birds, we've got a willet. Willets are pretty boring when they're walking around, but boy, when they fly, they are really pretty. All right, let's look quickly at some other terrestrial animals. We've got insects like butterflies, dragonflies, we've got spiders, and we've got reptiles, amphibians, and mammals. We'll just jog through some of these. Now, this is an interesting story. So I'm pretty well versed on bumblebee type insects. I was in Barcelona, Spain. I was fortunate enough to be in a photography show there, and my wife and I went hiking, and I found this bee. And this is a Mijas or purple Carpenter bee. And of course, you go on safari, you're going to see things you don't normally see: giraffes, zebras, lions, whatever. But you never know. You go to a European country that the insects could be completely different than what you're used to seeing. And this is definitely an exceptional looking insect. And here's a local butterfly. That's the Lorquin's admiral butterfly. I love all the different kinds of butterflies we have here. And then there are lots of natural bees. You think of bees as being a European honeybee. Well, yeah, there's lots of them. The Mayflower brought them over. They make a lot of the honey, but they're actually not truly natives. And there's lots of native bees that you don't normally see. This is a Bembex sand wasp. And I love the blue on the abdomen and the dark black stripes and the big green eye and the dust from all of the pollen all over him. Just again, the only reason I noticed him is because he flew differently than the European honeybees. And here is actually Ralph put up a hawk moth. And this is a white-lined, I think he said hummingbird moth, which it probably was. This is a white-lined sphinx hawk moth out in Borrego Springs, using its proboscis to get nectar out of a flower. And here is a dragonfly from up in Maine. And then this is an interesting story. So this is a marbled orb weaver. I spent the day in a helicopter trying to get pictures of moose, and I did not have a whole lot of luck. But then I was at the restaurant, I went in the restroom, and this guy was in the window. And he was highlighted by a street lamp about a block away. And if you see, can kind of see that face in his abdomen. So I call this man in the moon. And that's just sometimes you see something and you know it's a good photo. And that's when you start to get good. When you have an eye for composition, you know when angle is better than another angle. This is a gold dust day gecko in Kona, Hawaii. They're native to Madagascar, but you see them everywhere in Hawaii, like many invasive species in places like Hawaii and here in Florida. These are some wild mustangs. They're up in Guate, California, which is well east of San Diego, but these are wild animals. They're on a reserve, so they're protected, but they're completely wild. If you look at the mane of one of these animals, you can see that it's kind of got the reggae thing going on, the braid going on. And that's a Pomeranian next to some California poppies. All right, so to wrap up, if you're going to start doing nature photography, the best way to go, besides trying to get good composition and really practicing a lot, taking as many photos as possible, is start with something easy. And Ralph made this point as well. Flowers, landscapes, they don't move. So it's a great place to start. And you can look at different things, like whether it's a big group of flowers or whether the light is coming from behind and lighting up the flower, reflections from pond lilies, the way the light is on this white flower in the bottom right-hand corner. And then landscapes. So this is the sand dunes off Puerto San Carlos near La Paz in Mexico. And the sand dune, the shape of the sand dune itself is gorgeous, and the light coming at the end of day from the west. But what makes this photo to me so successful is the fact that there's someone in it, because it's really about connecting us back to nature. We have removed ourselves from nature because a lot of people find it scary, but we're part of nature, and we need to reconnect ourselves to nature if we are going to continue to live on this planet and have it be habitable. It's as simple as that. This is the Foggy Cove where I grew up, and actually that boat was handmade by my sister, and it just really suggests a lot of mood. And here is the pine trees, looking up into the pine trees on a hike. You don't always have to look straight ahead. You can look right, you can look left, you can look up. And then we have our final California sunset. My name is Jonathan Lavanne. You can go to my website, Facebook, Instagram right there. Thanks for listening, and hashtag enjoy nature every day. And everyone agrees, we are all part of the earth. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for that, and just for your commitment to making a difference through your published works. Now, I am pleased to introduce you to our final panelist, Craig. Craig Chaddock is a longtime wildlife enthusiast who loves to share the joys, struggles, and mysteries of nature through photography. He embraces digital media as a way to extend the sharing around the globe. Craig, thanks again for being here with us tonight.
Thank you very much. Let me go here and share my screen. So does everybody see that old camera there? That was my beginnings in high school, you know, dark rooms and everything else. So that's one reason I really embrace digital photography. This was the internet when I was a kid. If you got an award, it went in the newspaper. So I really embraced the technology of this century. I mean, it's just given everybody the opportunity to pursue this this endeavor. You can reach closer. You can reach really close with macro. You can see here a flower mite at the end of this, Anna's hummingbird. You can shoot in dimmer light. You know, when I was growing up, we had ISO 400. This was shot 20 minutes after sunset. You know, when the opportunity strikes, you can do so much more in late at night. You can shoot many shots to get just that one perfect shot with digital. You know, you're not, we used to have to reload after 36 shots, and the expense of shooting thousands of pictures a day would have been exorbitant for anybody beginning in photography. And you can process your photos in software rather than with chemicals in a dark room. You can do so much more with color. Color was a very difficult thing to work with in the past. Again, this is one of the native bees. Jonathan brought up the native bees. There's something like 600 native bee species here in San Diego County. They're very small compared to honeybees, but they're there if you can look for them. And the best way to look for them is on plants that the honeybees aren't interested in because they're not competing. And then just the ability to share your photography around the world. with digital media. It's just great. You can get feedback from people around the world, and it's a great thing to share. Just talking a little bit about photography. Let me pull up another window here with my notes. Lighting, we talked about early or late. I'm a late shooter. I like the late. Or overcast is also great, because that's when you can get more even lighting. But early or late, if you could work with the sun behind your shoulder, that's the best. Story, the direction, the emotion. Another tip I kind of like to pass on, it's not my original ideas. Once you get sort of your insurance shot, your good shot of something for the day, then you can really start being more creative. You can lower your shutter speeds, you can lower your ISO, get something a little bit better after you've kind of got the initial shot. Now, one of the things we'll talk about is patience. I agree 100%. You know, when you start off, the animals may be a little far away, but I keep something I call the 10-minute rule. Given a site, even if you're on a trail and there's people walking by, no matter what, just give it 10 minutes. If you notice activity increasing in that 10 minutes, give it another 10 minutes, and so on. Each time you see an increase in activity, invest some more time in that location, because oftentimes it could take several hours before you really get to where the wildlife doesn't see you as a threat. And oftentimes we have to shoot right off a trail. You know, we don't, in the city of San Diego and in a lot of areas in Southern California, you really shouldn't be wandering off a trail. So, you know, you're standing there is what the animal is going to be paying attention to. Don't worry too much about people walking by on the trail or bikes. Animals are used to things going by. So what they're concerned with is you. You're the one staring at them or looking at them. So I like to just be still as I can. I like to shoot with a monopod. That way I'm not lifting the camera up in front of me. I'm already in position. I can kind of just look around. They're not paying attention to where my eyes are and things like that. And after a couple hours, you might find the animals are almost underfoot to where you're almost too close to get pictures of them. Now, from a technical aspect, we've talked a lot about focus. And I want to kind of bring up a couple points about focusing. Sometimes the wildlife you're shooting, especially if you're trying to get a particular species, isn't going to be out in the open. You're going to have to learn to shoot around obstacles, like these reeds behind this bird here, which is a least bittern, and the reeds in front of it. If I had focused on those, the bird would be out of focus. And I can't talk about the particulars of everybody's camera, but I will just point out it's about control. You want to learn the modes of focus. You want to learn about focus points, and these are all things to experiment with. You want to learn how to manually override the focus. And you want to learn a concept called back button focus. I don't want to sell you on it, but I want to tell you to look into it. It's a big tip for nature photographers to try back button focus. So look into that. There's a lot of tutorials on that. This is a shot I took in my yard. You don't get an opportunity to shoot a baby skunk in the middle of the day because normally it's a mistake. And if you see it once, that means it'll never happen again. They only come out at night. So here again, this is a shot I would have missed if I'd let the camera take all the focus control. I would have missed getting that because the grass in front was what the camera would have focused on. There's another one we've talked, I think the video that Jessica put out was awesome. Talked about the different modes of photography. One thing that I like to talk about is exposure compensation. Again, I can't tell you exactly how to use it on your camera, but it's a very quick way to make an adjustment without having to go and fiddle with your modes and change from aperture priority to auto to manual or something like that. In this case, you have a dark background and the camera is going to try to lighten that up a little bit. And I'm going to give you an example. It's going to try to do this. And I'm going to lose a lot of detail in my white areas. So by changing the exposure compensation down a little bit, I get the proper exposure on the subject. So it's a little thing that's got a plus or minus button on there. It's usually very easy to get to on your camera. There again, look into it, exposure compensation. Here's an example of a bird that was backlit. Now it's a kind of a rule-breaking shot. I'm lighting from the back because it's an all-white bird, and I want to get the texture of the wings. And the light the camera would have given me would have been that. So I rolled up the exposure compensation to account for the background being very light. So that's a tool to use that I think really comes in handy when you're in the field. Now this is a shot. I'm going to tell you, don't ever delete something in camera. I come from a manufacturing background, so I like efficiency. So I'm sitting there, you're sitting there for hours out in the field waiting for a shot, and you think, oh, I'm going to save myself some time. Well, in the field, what I thought I saw here was a bird dropping a stick. And I would have deleted that shot if I hadn't been continuing shooting something else. And if you look here more closely, that's a seahorse. Even when I got back to my camera, to the computer, I almost deleted it again because my mind had already made up that it was a stick. It wasn't until the third time that I reviewed this picture that I actually realized, huh, that looks like a seahorse. So that brings me to the next thing is, I think, you know, my colleagues here are quite experienced on identifying things, and you may not be if you're starting out. Identify everything in your photos. I tag all my photos, what they are, where they are, because just because you're a beginner shooting doesn't mean you might not take a fantastic photo that 3 years from now, you might be asked, have you ever gotten this? Well, 3 years from now, you're going to have 100,000 photos in your library. So take the time now to get organized and stay organized. It'll make a big difference. I use a site called iNaturalist to help me out. A little plug for that. I'd say half the photos that I publish are because they're the only photo that was maybe publicly searchable, or a researcher or a publisher put a call out for photos. And I knew I had that because I've tagged it properly and I've identified it properly. So that's a big part of photography. If you take a nice picture, your friends will enjoy it, but it'll be lost in time if you don't identify it. If you identify it correctly, that photo will be available 10, 15 years from now. Sometimes things don't look like what they are. This looks like a sea bass to me, but it's actually a California sheephead juvenile. I got identified with the help of iNaturalist. So there again, this is an osprey with a fish. You guys are talking about shooting eye level. Well, this is shot from the cliff. So that's one way to get eye level without having this get down on the ground. This is another shot that was used in a species expansion study. It's a large Mexican filler crab, and they were normally not above Baja California. And I got a picture of this on San Diego Bay. And it was months later that somebody came across it and said, hey, where were you? What? And that ended up in a species expansion study. If I hadn't tagged it correctly, who knows what would have been seen. So find out what your birds are. If you've got multiple species in a shot, it's excellent. Identify them both, even the animal getting eaten. It's important to identify. This is some kind of a moth, and on top of this is a Western flower thrip. And I've had multiple Western flower thrips published because they're a pest in the agricultural industry in the Midwest. So there again, if you identify things, people will find your photos and they'll make use of them. Here's two species, a button hook jumping spider and a lady beetle, convergent lady beetle. David and Goliath shots are great. This is a Cassin's kingbird going after a crow. Always interaction is wonderful. House wren. Always get the eyes, but don't worry about it if you don't get the whole animal. Sometimes this tells more of a story than to get the whole thing. This is a coyote out in Arizona. And as we talked about eyes, I love macro photography. This is a kind of a fruit fly that's on sunflowers that come right in my yard, and that's the eyeball. I love macro. Somebody put in the question, Jessica put in a question, should you use flash in your photography? I only use flash for macro. I don't use flash for any other kind of photography. Maybe the other, my other colleagues will make a mention of that, but this is a shot just on the neighborhood walk. I don't always carry my best equipment. Sometimes I carry a point and shoot. And the point and shoot cameras today are so excellent. They have very small sensors. They're not as sensitive to light, but they focus very close and you can tell the story. And I think this shot has enough detail to tell the story. That's a skipper. That's me. I'm on several places, but if you just find me on Instagram, I have links to my Flickr from there. I'm Craig, and I go by the nickname Thumbwave on Instagram and also iNaturalist. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Craig. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for joining us. Now we're going to spend a few minutes to answer some of the guest questions that have popped up. But before we do, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you wanted to dive deeper into this topic and get some extra tips and tricks, Craig already alluded to it, but part of our Second Nature wildlife video series, we have the wildlife photography video that was put together by one of our educators and wildlife photographer, Jessica Waters, and it gives you lots of really good practical tips for anyone who's going from being an experienced photographer to just starting out. So go ahead and check that out on thelivingcoast.org or on our Facebook page. And also please support our panelists by reaching out to them through their handles and websites that we've included in our notes in our chat. So with that, I think one of the questions that was kind of getting sent around a little bit was about photography. Craig mentioned it, or sorry, flash. Craig mentioned it, but specifically they were asking about when to appropriately use flash and when not to, when it comes to the sensitivity of animals like nighttime animals and such. Did anyone want to elaborate on that?
I can give my 2 cents. I'm happy to give my 2 cents. Outdoor photography, I would say above water that I would never use flash. There's always a way around using a flash. And if you use a flash, it's except as Craig said, for macro, possibly, it's probably just not going to give you the shot you want, and it's probably going to distract your subject as well. Now, underwater, there's a finer line. You have to have strobes. You have to use additional light to get a shot, because of course the way light passes through water is very different than the way it passes through air. And so try not to be too invasive, but I have to say overall, most animals don't seem to react to it. Fish don't react to it. Octopus react to it a little bit, so I take a shot or two and then move on. Turtles sometimes can be annoyed by strobes. And so I want to keep that in mind. It's definitely about respecting the animal, but wanting to be able to get an image to share with people. And so as long as the animal doesn't act like it's afraid, and if it is, it's going to go away, then you're probably fine.
Great, thank you so much, Jonathan. Another question from the crowd was about budget and recommendation for accessories to get. This particular person wanted to get photos of dragonfly nymphs underwater with a DSLR, but I think a lot of people out there in general are just kind of looking for suggested gear or where to kind of get started in terms of accessories, especially when you're working on a budget.
Good luck.
I do some underwater photography, and I don't have the expensive housing that I think a lot of my colleagues do, because I haven't invested in the underwater, because I do a lot of above water type of pictures generally. But what I have is called a dye pack bag. It's essentially just like a watertight bag that your DSLR can go into. have some limitations as opposed to the very expensive housing, but for a budget, it's a good place to start. You can I got mine off Amazon, so it's about $60 and your DSLR can go in there. I've used it in Hawaii and Australia, Galapagos. It's never failed me. So it's just a really inexpensive option if that's what you're looking for.
And you
There's
could always
also-
use the fishbowl trick where you put your camera in it and, you know, you put the little fishbowl underwater and take it. I mean, there's been a lot of actually really famous pictures taken with that, but I pulled this lens out for that question specifically. This is a Laowa 24 millimeter macro probe. It's all manual, but the tip of it's all waterproof. So you can just stick it underwater and your camera never gets wet. And I bought one because I've used it quite a bit. But I would recommend just, you can rent it for, I don't know, $70 for, I don't know, a week or something like that. So that's always an option, you know.
What about for land photography, getting into photographing on land?
As far as like a budget, I would not undersell the idea of buying used equipment. Photographers are constantly upgrading their gear, and you can get really nice equipment by just looking on used sites. Like B&H has a as a used category, and you can get a lot of good stuff for a good price there.
I mean, even on Amazon, but B&H is definitely a place to go to find good used equipment that you can trust.
But I would also say San Diego has like an unbelievable Craigslist. You know, like up here, if you go on Craigslist and you look for a good camera, it's either going to be super expensive or really bad shape. And down there, I feel like there's such an influx of people moving in and out of there all the time. And there's, you know, just a lot of people with gear and stuff offloading it pretty cheap. I think everything I bought to start off was used, and almost all of it was in San Diego on Craigslist. And I still have it today, you know, it works great.
Great. Another question from the audience is, what is the hardest part of your job?
I would
That's
say-
tough because, I mean, if you're a photographer, I'm sorry, Greg, go ahead.
I was just going to say briefly, watching bad behavior from other people.
Yes, absolutely. That's a good one. But when you're doing something you love, there's not a whole lot, to be quite honest with you. Kind of, I guess, keeping up with the organization of files, which Craig spoke of, which I'm sure he's much better at than I am.
Yeah, I think like when you do it as you're trying to make a career out of it, like the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you want to take pictures, but that's often the last thing you get to do. You know, you're in a computer trying to, you know, get assignments, or you're trying to, I mean, you're a maintenance man, you're a marketer, you know, there's a lot of things that come into it. And I mean, I sometimes get frustrated with that. It's just being like, God, I wish I just spent more time outside taking pictures, you know?
I definitely second that too. I think, you know, the fantasy is that a professional wildlife photographer is just out, you know, traveling the world, and it's super exciting. And you're spending a lot of time behind your computer screen, marketing and doing a lot of business type of stuff that's not very fun.
This one's come in both from Facebook and from our group. What programs do you use to organize your photos?
Okay, I was just going to say I use Lightroom primarily for organization and about 80% of my editing. But I'm also categorizing or cataloging my stuff elsewhere, like on Flickr and iNaturalist. But I'd say Lightroom is the overall program used for organizing and tagging the photos.
And I would say that whatever system you use, and often your computer will come at least with a basic system that you can practice with, you really should be, as much as you can do to manipulate the photo after the fact, you want to do as little as you can. You know, maybe adjusting the exposure, the color, maybe cropping it a little bit. But at this point, you will often now see photos that have obviously been doctored to the point of that obviously is not what that photo originally looked like.
No, I appreciate you said that, because like I use Lightroom as well. I don't even know how to use Photoshop, but you know, you get these pictures in California where you and I could be on the same dive. and you take your pictures, and I could go back and through Photoshop or whatever, and I can remove every piece of backscatter, every piece of debris in the water, and you'd say like, and you know, you turn the water from green to blue, and you're like, man, was that person diving in the Caribbean today or what? You know, I mean, it's kind of like, me personally, I'm not allowed to do too much on the editing stuff, but that's why I try to like just stick to Lightroom. But it's a pretty amazing program.
Great.
I use Lightroom as well.
Well, there you go. We got an answer. What is everyone's favorite animal?
Wow,
Cheetah.
that's a tough one.
No doubt for me.
Cow.
Did you say cow, Ralph?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I
Love
would
it.
say, you know, I talked about diversity, and that's my problem. I find all of the life on this planet to be just simply amazing, and to be respected no matter what it is. So it's hard for me to settle on any one thing. I would say if I had to settle on one thing, it would be my Chihuahua.
I'd say my favorite animal is the next one that I'm going to find and put on iNaturalist.
There you go. Yeah, finding something that you've never photographed or seen before, that to me is an exciting day.
Okay, great. And then this question specific to Jennifer. Can you tell us what equipment you took on your Africa tours? How many bodies and lenses?
Yeah, so I've been to Africa a couple times, so it varies slightly, but I'm always carrying more than one body, typically a minimum of 2. And I use a telephoto lens. Typically, right now I'm using a 200 to 500 Nikon, but I've also used a Tamron 150 to 600. With Africa, it's not like being in North America. You are always in a safari vehicle. If you're out on a game drive, you're not allowed to be out on foot typically. And the animals are a lot bigger than they are here. So when you're photographing a giraffe or an elephant, they're pretty big in your frame. So you don't need as long of a lens. So 400 millimeter sometimes will be just fine. And then I always use a landscape type lens. So 24 to 70 typically. And then I usually have a teleconverter with me just for those further images. And I try to take a macro lens with me just for some fun things that you might find, especially when you're in your camp. So
Great. Well, we're just about to wrap up. So can you guys just give kind of final thoughts or encouragement to all those budding wildlife photographers out there?
I would just say, whether you're going to be a photographer or not, just get out in it, because again, it's the real world. So be in the real world.
yeah. For
I
me,
would say,
go ahead,
ahead.
Craig. Go ahead, Craig.
I would just say photography is a results-driven activity. So don't be too focused on the camera or the techniques. Learn, learn, learn. I think everybody's been talking about that. Keep learning. You'll settle into the best equipment and the best techniques for you over time.
I was just gonna say, practice, practice, practice. It's essentially the same thing. You know, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Network with other people. There's lots of Facebook groups. Join those things. You can share your pictures. Jessica mentioned that in the video as well. You know, the more that you can share your images and get feedback, the better you're gonna be. And because it's me, I'm always gonna tell you, just have your subject's best interest in mind, whether that's a fish, whether that's an elephant. Just do what's best for them, whether or not you get a picture or not.
Yeah, and I would just say stick with it, you know, enjoy the process, because everyone, I think in today's social media world, everyone's imagining these big lives as photographers or influencers or whatever, and then they have way more responsibility than they want, and you know, then you're not like, this is when you get to go out there, that's the most amazing time. So just stick with it and really enjoy it, because that's what we all want to see anyways. I don't go out to like play with my camera. I go out to see what I get to photograph, you know. So say enjoy it. It's really fun.
All
Yeah,
right.
one more comment would be that comes off of what Ralph just said. When you are photographing something, make sure you take a moment to actually look at it with your own eyeballs, not just through the camera lens, so you can experience it for yourself.
That's a great final thought, Jonathan. Thanks so much. And thank you again all for your time. Just a final reminder that we are the Living Coast Discovery Center. You can check us out on our website, www.thelivingcoast.org. Check out our new virtual series, Second Nature, for more videos on how to explore nature in San Diego. And we'll have future webinars as well posted there. And you can follow all of our social, as well as we'll be including all the social tags for all of our wonderful panelists. So thank you again. We hope you have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys.